Over 11 days in May 2024, I travelled overland by ferry and train from Kiel in Germany to the four continental Scandinavian capitals of Oslo, Copenhagen, Stockholm and Helsinki. From the fjords of Norway, the bridges that link Denmark together, the rolling green landscapes of southern Sweden and the islands and lakes of Finland, I took the slow route round the ScandiCaps. In this episode, I make it to the Danish capital, Copenhagen, before heading across the south of Sweden by train to Stockholm, and then journey through the countless islands of the Stockholm Archipelago. Having sailed south overnight from the Oslo Fjorden and completely slept through the overnight stop at Fredrikshavn at the top of Denmark, day 5 dawned bright and sunny with the ship sailing through the Kattegat, close to the shores of Sweden and Denmark, as the sea narrows towards the Danish island of Silja Line and the Øresund. From the starboard side of the ship, it's Denmark, and from the port side, it's Sweden. The first major sight of the morning is located at the point where the gap between Denmark and Sweden is at its narrowest, with less than 4 kilometres separating the facing cities of Helsingborg in Sweden and Helsingør in Denmark across the Øresund. On a small foreland jutting out into the Øresund at the narrowest point sits the Krongborg Slot, though forever immortalised as Elsinore in Shakespeare's Hamlet. The first fortress was built on the site in the 15th century, though the current castle is a result of a rebuild towards the end of the 16th century. The castle spent time as a royal palace, prison and military barracks up until 1923, when the Royal Danish Army left the castle, handing over to the state as a historic monument. After a thorough renovation, it was opened to the public in 1938. Until the opening of the Øresund Bridge in 2000, the ferry link, both rail and road, between the two cities was one of the major connections between Sweden and Central Europe. The closeness of the two cities also played a vital role in the successful evacuation of almost the entire Jewish population of Nazi-occupied Denmark across to neutral Sweden shortly before Hitler ordered their deportation in October 1943. Entering the Øresund also means that we're closing in fast on Copenhagen. The Danish capital straddles the islands of Zealand and Amager, with the channel of the Øresund passing through the city. The historic centre of royal palaces, university and government buildings sit on Zealand. Originally founded as a Viking fishing village sometime in the 10th century in the area of modern-day Gamla Strand, the settlement grew and eventually became the capital of Denmark early in the 15th century. The city reached the zenith of its power when it became the de facto capital of the Kalmar Union that covered all of modern-day Denmark, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, the Faroes, Orkney and Shetland Islands, as well as most of Sweden, a large part of Finland and even parts of Russia. As the cultural, political, economic and royal centre of Scandinavia at the height of the Renaissance, the city flourished, and by the 17th century was one of the most important cities in Europe. The 18th century was less kind to the city, starting almost straight away in July 1700 when the city was bombarded by a joint British-Dutch-Swedish navy. Whilst the damage from that wasn't significant, losing a third of the city's population to an outbreak of the plague, which ran from June 1711 to March 1712, was. A series of fires in 1728 and again in 1795 destroyed large parts of the city, and repairs had only been completed from the last of these when the British once again turned up and attacked the city over 3 weeks in the summer of 1807, resulting in the death of at least 2,000 civilians and the destruction of most of the city. Following the European revolutions of 1848, Copenhagen became the capital of the new constitutional monarchy of Denmark on June 5, 1849. On the 9th of April 1940, the city was occupied by the Nazis, who initially left the Danish to their own affairs, but in August 1943 relations between the Danish and German authorities broke down, and the Nazis took full control of the country and the city. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery led British troops into Copenhagen on the 8th of May 1945, officially liberating it and bringing World War II in Denmark to a close. After going through a rough patch in the 1980s and early 1990s, with a city close to bankruptcy at a number of points, Copenhagen bounced back, in part through the construction of a new city area for Oderstad on Omega, and for buildings for the city's metro, but also in part through the construction of the Øresund Bridge that brought Copenhagen into the centre of an international metropolitan area covering itself and its Swedish neighbour Malmö. Today, the waterfront is home to gleaming glass buildings housing theatres and opera houses. Further inland beyond the historic and Instagrammable Nyhavn sits the historic buildings of the Royal Palace. One of the most visually striking buildings on the waterfront is the Black Diamond, though officially it's called Det Kongelige Bibliotek, or the Royal Library. Completed in 1999, this is an extension to the Royal Danish Library, jointly the National Library of Denmark and the Library of the University of Copenhagen. Behind the modern extension sits the 1906 built buildings of the library, and hidden away down the side in a space between the library and the Royal Palace sits the Library Garden, one of the most tranquil locations in the bustling city. Built on the site of an old naval harbour, the garden was designed in 1920 with a pool in the centre of the garden as a reminder of its maritime past. Just beyond the Royal Library Garden is the imposing bulk of the Cristiansborg. Construction of the Royal Palace was started in 1731 with the demolition of the cramped and dark Copenhagen castle that had previously occupied the spot. That castle, from the late 14th century, was itself built on the demolished remains of the original Absalon Castle, built around 1167. Building work on the Cristiansborg was completed in 1740, but a little over 50 years later, a fire in a chimney spread uncontrollably and burnt the castle to the ground in 1794. Reconstruction work started in 1803, but it took until 1828 before the works were completed enough for it to be inaugurated. However, less than 60 years later, in 1884, the building burnt down again. Reconstruction began in 1906 and was formally handed back to the state in December 1927, making this either the third or fifth royal castle on the site, depending on how you're counting. Today it houses the Danish Parliament, the offices of the Danish Prime Minister and the Supreme Court of Denmark, along with several parts of the palace still being used for royal functions. Perhaps one of the most well-known parts of the city is the Nyhavn, or New Harbour, a 17th century waterfront and canal that's become famous as one of the main restaurant and entertainment centres in the city, with many of the harbourside buildings now housing restaurants and bars. The harbour was constructed between 1670 and 1675 by Danish soldiers and Swedish prisoners of war, creating a link from the sea to the centre of the inner city at Kongens Nytorv. Kongens Nytorv, or the King's New Square, is the largest square of the city, originally laid out in 1670 under the reign of Christian V as part of a refortification of the city. Part of the reason was to move the centre of the city from a medieval centre in Gammeltorv, at that time a muddy medieval marketplace, to a Parisian-inspired cobbled new square and garden complex. At the centre of the square is an equestrian statue to Christian, dating from 1688. It's the oldest equestrian statue in Scandinavia, or at least it would be if the original, which was made from lead, hadn't been recast in bronze in 1939. A new day and just enough time before the next leg to wander over to Amalienborg, the official residence of the Danish royal family. By pure coincidence, I was there just as the changing the guard ceremony was taking place. The Amalienborg that exists today was built on the site of two former palaces. The first, built between 1669 and 1673 for Queen Sophie Amalie, consort to King Frederick III, of a time outside the old city walls of Copenhagen. The king died in 1670 before the building was complete, but the Queen Dowager lived there from the building's completion through to her death in 1685. 4 years later, Sophie's son Charles V celebrated his 44th birthday at the palace with the staging of an opera in a specially built temporary theatre. The initial performance passed off without issue, so a repeat was planned a few days later, but almost immediately after the start of the performance, a stage decoration caught fire, which then set the temporary theatre, and then the palace itself ablaze, burning everything to the ground and killing 180 people. The second palace was built by Christian's son and consisted of a summer house, pavilion and orangeries. In 1748, plans were drawn up to create a new district of the city, Frederiksstaden, to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Oldenburg family's ascent to the throne of Denmark and the 300th anniversary of the following year of the coronation of Christian I of Denmark. The new district was to be centred on the site of Amalienborg and at the heart of the creation of 4 identical mansions built to house 4 distinguished families of nobility. Building work on the palaces started in the early 1750s and was generally completed by the early 1760s. Their elevation from mansions of high society used only occasionally during the year to royal residences was quick. With the Cristiansborg's fire of 1794, the royal family found itself homeless, and in a matter of days, for quite a bit of money and a good few titles thrown in, the nobleman who'd owned the palaces passed them over to the royal family, and from then onwards the site has been the official residence of the Danish royal family. Today, 2 of the 4 palaces are open to the public to look around, with the other 2, the ones with guards on the doors, are closed and still used by the royal family, with the current king, Frederick X, and Queen Mary living in one, and Frederick's mother, the now retired Queen Margrethe II, living in the other, as she has done since 1967. The palace is guarded round the clock by the Royal Life Guards in a full dress uniform that bears an uncanny likeness to that of the UK household guards, complete with bearskins. With the changing the guard completed, it was time to head over in the direction of Copenhagen's Hovedbanegård, or Copenhagen H as it's known colloquially, to pick up the train for the next leg of our journey. Since the opening of the Øresund Bridge, it's been possible to catch regular high-speed trains between the Danish and Swedish capitals, with trains leaving Copenhagen heading first through a tunnel and then over the bridge to Malmö, and from there across southern Sweden to Stockholm. Possible and actually are 2 very different words, and for reasons that were never fully explained, a few weeks before the trip, an email from SJ, the Swedish National Rail Company, informed us that for technical reasons our train would be starting in Malmö rather than Copenhagen, and we'd need to get an earlier Øresund tag service for the short hop between the countries up and over the Øresund Bridge. The Øresundsbron, technically the Øresund connection, is a combined tunnel and bridge connection across the Øresund, which opened in July 2000. Combined with a Great Belt fixed link between Zealand and Fyn, and existing connections between Fyn and the Jutland Peninsula, they helped to create a continuous road and rail route from the Scandinavian Peninsula through to Central Europe without the need to go round via the top of Norway, Finland and Russia. Construction on the link commenced in 1995 and the building phase was completed by August 1999. The link is made up of 3 parts. The western 4.05 km long Drogden Tunnel, which connects Kastrup on the Danish island of Omega with the small man-made island of Pebberholm. Pebberholm, the second part of the link, is 4 km long and just 400 metres wide, enough space to accommodate the portal for the Drogden Tunnel and the gradual ramp up onto the bridge section of the link. The link was designed this way because the bridge, the whole way across, would have interfered with air traffic from Copenhagen Airport, which sits almost on top of the Kastrup portal to the tunnel. It also provides a clear channel for ships that don't wish to pass under the main part of the bridge. The third and final part of the link is the 7.85 km long bridge. Whilst the railway and road run next to each other in the tunnel, when it comes to the bridge, the road deck sits above the railway lines. The box girder approach sections to the main cable-stayed bridge are supported by concrete piers every 140 metres, whilst the cable-stayed section of the bridge spans 491 metres with a height of 204 metres, allowing shipping to pass with 57 metres of headroom. The border between Denmark and Sweden is 2.55 kilometres onto the bridge from the Danish side. Having crossed the border and changed trains in Malmö, we continued our journey north and east across the Scandinavian peninsula, at first passing rolling green fields. At Alvesta, we passed a reminder that around 10% of Sweden's economy is linked to forestry and forest-related products. Just how many raw Billy bookcases were on that freight train? Further north and east, as just farmland starts to give way to a mix of farmland and forests, interspersed with the occasional lake, or 3. final arrival into Stockholm is quite spectacular, coming in over high viaducts above Lake Mälaren and then passing over the back of Gamla stan before heading into Stockholm Central Station. With only a morning to spare in Stockholm, there was just enough time to head down to the Strandkajen in the centre of the city to pick up the cruise round the islands of the central part of the city on a tour that was supposed to visit the Djurgårdsbrunnskanalen, or Royal Game Park Well Canal, to give it its equally mouthful English translation. After setting off and a quick stop just round the island on Nybroviken to pick up a couple more passengers, the tour headed out over to Djurgården, once a royal hunting park, but today the entertainment centre of the city, home to a theme park and many of the city's main museums. Running through the heart of the park is a canal which creates a shortcut out into the archipelago and a pleasant water feature in the centre of the park. Unfortunately, due to very low sea levels, it wasn't possible for the boat to risk traversing the canal for fear of bottoming out. So instead, after a quick sail down into the start of the canal, we turned around and instead headed round the other side of the Djurgården. This afforded excellent views over to some of the city's most important museums, including the Unibachen Children's Museum, the Nordiska Museet and the Vasa Museet. The latter home to the ill-fated Vasa, the brand new flagship of the Swedish Navy that capsized just minutes into her maiden voyage and sunk to the bottom of the Baltic, where she lay for 333 years before she was recovered back to the surface in April 1961. Sprayed with polyethylene glycol continuously for 17 years to force out all the water from the wood, followed by many more years of drying, it wasn't until 2011 that she was fully dry. After a sail past the Djurgården, we turn round and head back towards the centre of Stockholm, sailing past the downtown Vikingterminalen of one of two cruise ferry lines that head across the Baltic from Stockholm to Helsinki. Before a final sail past to the historic waterfront of Gamla stan, home to the historic heart of the city, including the Kungliga Slot, the Baroque style royal palace, still the official residence of the Swedish royal family. Which all then very nicely came round full circle, with a royal guard trotting past on horseback shortly after we disembarked. Though now it was time to get moving again, heading out to the Vatahamn terminal and the next leg of our journey out into the Stockholm Archipelago and then on to Helsinki. Our cruise ferry for the night was the smallest and oldest of the trip, though when she was launched in 1991, the Silja Symphony was the largest cruise ferry on the planet, a title she held for just 2 years. Silja Line is headquartered in Helsinki, part of the larger Tallink group, but because they're Finnish, there has to be a Moomin, or 5 on board, including in our Moomin class cabin. Silja Symphony and her slightly older sister Silja Serenade were the first ships to be constructed with a centreline promenade, an internal promenade from where you can access boutique shops, duty-free, specialty restaurants, duty-free, kiosks, duty-free, bars and duty-free, with some of the best views for duty-free to be had from the glass lifts. sailing between the two countries for highest excise duty on alcohol had allowed for Swedes and Finns to develop a booze cruise culture only matched by the Brits. However, in July 1999, all that was due to come to a crashing halt as new EU legislation would prohibit the tax-free sale of alcohol and tobacco on intra-EU transport. But there was a solution in the form of a semi-autonomous Swedish-speaking Finnish island archipelago of Åland. As part of Finland, the islands are a part of the European Union on all aspects of EU trade and law, with the convenient exception of value-added tax and excise duty. A ship sailing from Stockholm to Helsinki is an intra-EU service. However, a ship sailing from Stockholm to Mariehamn in Åland, or a ship heading from Åland to Helsinki, is, under EU law, travelling from an EU member state to a third area and then from a third area to the EU, allowing for the duty and tax-free sale of alcohol and tobacco, which goes some way to explain the vast number of duty-free shops on board. It also helps to explain how both Silja Line and Viking, which was quietly slipping out of the city ahead of us, can fill nearly 3,000 berths a night each in each direction. And so, as we gently slipped away from our moorings in Stockholm, we headed out initially as the service from Stockholm to Mariehamn for a good old round of tax avoidance. Starting quite a bit of a way out of the centre of Stockholm means that rather than picking our way through the tourist boats and passenger ferries to the centre of the city, we were quickly out into the Baltic and thousands of islands that make up the Stockholm Archipelago. The journey through the archipelago takes up the whole of the afternoon, evening, and towards the start of the night. As we travel further away from Stockholm, the communities get smaller and in places a little more fortified. Hidden away within the archipelago at the end of the island of Rindo, precisely where nobody would be expecting it, is the Oskar-Fredriksborg, built between 1870 and 1877 to protect the freshly dredged channel that ran past the eastern end of the island that had opened it up to shipping. In the end, the site was in use for less than 50 years as a disarmament programme carried out in 1924 saw it being decommissioned, having never seen any action. Today it's open to the public and a good place if you happen to be a ship spotter. In a race against the sunset, the sun just about outlasted the archipelago, with it still being light as we left the last of the islands and set off for a 22 nautical mile tax diversion. Next time, we stop in Mariehamn for tax purposes, sail past the Swedish fortification that was supposed to keep the Russians out, and take a tour of the Finnish capital.